Hi, my name is Bree. I'm 18 and I live with a condition where I have vestibular migraines, and it has affected my quality of life, and I've had it my entire life. And I made this YouTube channel to talk about my experience and to talk about vestibular migraines in general. So for this video, I'm just going to be talking about my experience personally and what it was like for me growing up with this condition and stuff like that. So I think it's important to mention before I start talking about my vestibular migraines is that I also have a condition called dysautonomia and POTS, which stands for something I cannot remember off the top of my head right now. But it has also been part of my life for my whole life as well. And dysautonomia and POTS are conditions where there are a wide array of symptoms and it affects everybody differently, and there usually aren't very many cases that are too similar, but everybody who experiences blood pressure problems and fainting issues and heart issues and things like that when standing up or laying down, or experience exercise intolerance and things like that, they all generally have what is called dysautonomia and POTS. I was diagnosed when I was 10 years old, just with a standard sit-up, lay-down, stand-up test, take my blood pressure a million times kind of thing. And for a while, we as in me and my family, thought that that was the cause of my migraines, that because I would stand up and all the blood would pool to my legs or something like that, then maybe that's causing all the dizziness and stuff like that. So for a long time, we kind of went in circles trying to treat the dysautonomia, but not really the migraines. So I think that's why it took so long to find out that I had migraines in the first place. I believe, of course I can't remember, I may have had my first vestibular migraine when I was 8 months old. My mom found me in my crib and I looked like I had died, in her words, but I was breathing. So she took me to the hospital and some hours had passed and then I was fine. So they sent me home, like everything was normal, and then from that moment on, sort of on a monthly basis, the same thing would happen over and over again. And when you're that young, no one can really tell what's wrong with you. You know, it's hard to tell when babies are in pain or when they're experiencing a migraine. So it wasn't until I was 2 years old when a doctor said that I might be experiencing migraines. I know that migraines can be common with kids and teenagers, but it usually doesn't happen with very small babies, which is kind of strange. But I know for as long as I can remember that I have been having vestibular migraines. The symptoms have always been the same. I have always been on the sort of same monthly 6 weeks or so schedule to have these migraines for as long as I can possibly remember. I've never known a life without my vestibular migraines. So I would assume that even back then, to where I can't remember, like 8 months old, that might have been what was happening as well. So that's all we can really know. I mean, there's no way to go back and just like figure out what was going on when I was little. Growing up with vestibular migraines was interesting, to say the least, especially because trying to tell anyone what was going on was just impossible. I would just kind of, little 6-year-old me at the elementary playground, I would just like fall down and have a vestibular migraine just kind of without warning, and I'd just like be in pain and screaming and crying, and these kids, like, they didn't know what was wrong with me, and I really didn't know how to explain what was wrong with me. And so they would get the teachers and be like, I think that she might be like throwing a fit or something. Like, they didn't know what was wrong. The teachers didn't know what was wrong. And at that point when I was 6, all I knew what to do was like call my mom. She knows what's going on, and she could take me home and then wait till the migraine passes and come back to school the next day feeling pretty okay. From, I guess, the 8 months to about 9 or so, before I hit puberty, I would get vestibular migraines on a schedule, and they would be incredibly intense. What happens when I actually have like the migraine, which is what I'm just gonna call it, the migraine versus like the days leading up to it, is I am completely incapacitated. I can hardly move. I have to lay down. I can't talk. I can maybe say a few words and it's just exhausting. I throw up a lot. I cannot open my eyes. I have to lay there perfectly still, just kind of like in immense pain, just the time would always vary. Sometimes it would be a few hours, sometimes it would be almost a whole day. It's never actually gone to 24 hours before, and I feel like if it did, I would probably have to go to the hospital. So, thankfully that's never happened. During my migraines, I think the most debilitating part of them is my vertigo. I do know that some people with vestibular migraines do not actually experience pain more than they do pressure, but I would say for me that my vertigo is so intense and I feel like I'm spinning around so violently that it actually hurts. That's the way I describe it. Moving in any way, shape, or form during these migraines is extremely exhausting. Usually when I would have these migraines, I would just hope that I would just fall unconscious eventually, from exhaustion, and that I wouldn't have to just be conscious during this entire experience. Any kind of light, any kind of sound, any kind of motion, anything, and I really do mean anything, would be so painful, and it would be absolute hell for me. So, that's kind of what a migraine is like for me. And then, once I hit puberty, something started to change that was very scary. I would start to have days leading up to the migraine. So I would have days where I could still function, though it was limited, and I was just dizzy all the time. Trying to figure out what that was and trying to figure out my new schedule was terrifying because, as a 9-year-old, the dawning realization of, your condition could change at any time without warning and make your life 10 times harder than it already was a 9-year-old shouldn't have to go through that. So the schedule for me now is sort of, I'll be fine for about a month or 6 weeks, a month and a half, it changes a little bit. And then I will have anywhere from a couple days to a couple weeks of dizziness that just get more and more intense the closer I get to the actual migraine. And becomes harder and harder to move around, becomes harder and harder to watch TV, it becomes harder and harder to, just basic functions. It gets to a point where I can't go outside. Then it gets to a point where I become bedridden and going to the bathroom is very difficult. And eventually the actual migraine comes and then it goes. And then after that, I will probably have a day or two where I still feel a little dizzy and disoriented, but then after that, I'm fine. That's kind of how the schedule has been my whole life leading up to now. I remember going to the doctors. I've been to the doctors for as long as I can remember. I've been to so many neurologists for as long as I can remember. I went to Texas Children's a lot for my entire childhood. That was sort of where I went and who we talked to. We talked to all the neurologists there. They're all very, very competent neurologists. They knew what they were talking about. But when they came to me, they just had no idea. I don't think I was ever misdiagnosed because they couldn't think of anything that would have a name. They just thought, well, you have very strange migraines, the end. And they just kind of did a bunch of tests to see exactly what caused them. It's all kind of a blur because a lot of my childhood was with a lot of different doctors and a lot of different tests. I remember when I was 5 years old, I was taken to, this is based on my 5-year-old memory, I was taken to this kind of lab thing with a bunch of doctors who I didn't know why I was there. I did a bunch of balance tests. I did a lot of lots of very strange tests that I remember not liking a lot. I remember they strapped me to a chair in a dark room and they started spinning me around, which immediately fired the panic response. They strapped me down, but I managed to get out of the chair somehow. I must have wriggled out of the straps, or I must have not been strapped in very hard. I think a lot of those tests actually were never finished just because my panic response was so immense. I absolutely refused to do those tests. I remember taking a test where they would put water in your ears, and I guess it would mess with something in your vestibular system that would cause you vertigo, and it felt exactly like my headaches. And I was freaking out because those things, like I said, are immensely painful. They are terrifying. I can't move. I have to close my eyes. And they're like, yeah, the water does that, and it's gonna keep doing that. We're gonna do it 4 more times. And I was like, I could not. I remember kicking and screaming, and I knew if they wanted to, they could have held me down, but I think my mom was just just stop, it's not gonna work. I remember taking a lot of dysautonomia tests because for a while that was the focus of trying to figure out what was wrong with me. I took lots of tilt table tests. I took stand up, lay down, stand up, whatever tests. I took a lot of lots of scans, lots of different medicine that made my limbs go to sleep. A medicine that was also used as an antidepressant and should not have been given to me when I was 13 years old because I think it messed up my chemicals in my brain, and I think it just kind of made me permanent sad, which is a very unfortunate story, but I guess that's just trial and error when you're trying to figure out what's wrong. I remember taking a medicine, lots of anti-nausea medicine when I was having my actual migraines. That kind of worked 50-50. I mean, when I'm in a migraine and I need to throw up, I'm going to throw up. I don't think there's a lot of stuff you can give me that will stop the nausea. I've never been able to, like, there have been migraines where I haven't thrown up, but I think recently, since I moved to my apartment about a year ago, I've thrown up almost every time I've gotten a migraine, so I think that's just kind of how it is now. I remember for a long time I was given an anti-anxiety pill called Klonopin or Clonopazim, or however you pronounce the medical name of it. That was an anti-anxiety that would calm my dizziness, because my anxiety and my dizziness, they're one and the same. And I know for a lot of people with vestibular migraines, getting dizzy and having vertigo is the nightmare scenario. It's terrifying, especially when you're away from home, because you don't know what's going to happen if you suddenly fall down. You don't know, like, you're extremely vulnerable. You don't know what will happen to you. Like, one time I was riding my bike and I had a migraine suddenly and I fell down on the road, and, like, thank God my mom was there. Otherwise, like, would a car have, like, hit me or something? It was, like, because I couldn't move. I had no idea where I was in the world. You know, that spatial disorientation. I couldn't open my eyes. I was completely on the ground. I mean, maybe if I really, really tried, I could open my eyes and, like, sort of crawl to the curb, but I mean, that just wasn't happening. So I would take that to quell my anxiety, and in turn it would sometimes quell the dizziness. I remember for a while I was on birth control just for, like, abnormal cycles, menstrual cycles, because my doctor's best guess, you know, back in, like, 2008, 2009, was that once I started my cycle and I hit puberty, maybe my migraines would go away. Like, you know, that's literally all they could think of at that time. So, of course it didn't, but it also didn't follow the cycle either, which was, like, their next guess. Like, maybe every time I had a cycle I would also get dizzy and get a migraine, but that just kind of never happened either. But they put me on a birth control to try and I think make my cycles less intense, because they were pretty intense, especially for, like, a 10-year-old. I got them early and they were not pleasant, and my family has a history of all that bad stuff anyway. But I think putting me on that birth control sort of messed up my cycle. So it's like a hit or miss. I mean, sometimes when I can sense that it's coming, I will start to feel dizzy, and then I'll, like, mistake that for, like, I'm about to get a migraine type of deal. But it's never been like, okay, as soon as you're getting a cycle, you're getting a migraine. Like, that's never been a thing. My quality of life is, one, all I know. So I don't really know if it's super high or super low, or I guess that's subjective. When I was little, when I only had my migraines, you know, just, like, bang, and then I'd be better, I would say that it was pretty normal. I mean, I could go to school. I mean, I'd be out for a day a month. In elementary school, I'd come back. I would have fun at school. You know, it would just kind of be like, she has migraines sometimes, and that's okay. Like, that's how it is. Once I started to get dizzy beforehand, I remember my grades slowly beginning to plummet because I was absent all the time, and also just my morale would go down slowly as I grew up, because I would have all this makeup work, weeks of makeup work every month, and it didn't work. You know, I couldn't finish all that all the time, especially once I got into junior high and high school. It couldn't work. There was too much. Even with, like, plans to make my workload less heavy, it still was a problem. I think around high school, around sophomore year, I think inside I had given up. You know, I didn't believe that I would be getting an education anyway, just because I couldn't be there to do it. And even if I did it from home, it wouldn't change anything, because I would still get dizzy and I would still get so sick. You know, it's not just because it's at home that means it makes it any easier. Unfortunately, infuriatingly, it did not make it any easier. I think socially I wasn't super adept. I didn't have a whole lot of friends, and I didn't like my school. I didn't like the way that the teachers treated me. I always hated how the nurses and the teachers always acted like I didn't actually have a problem. You know, they couldn't see what was wrong with me because vestibular migraines are kind of like an invisible illness. They didn't understand the anxiety that came with being dizzy. You know, I assume for people without vestibular migraines, getting dizzy is kind of uncomfortable, and you're just kind of like, you sit down and then like you're fine and you're better. But for being dizzy, for me and for anyone else with vestibular migraines, it sucks. It sucks. And there's just no way to like tell somebody like, this sucks for me, and have them be like, okay, I believe you. I just remember so many people not believing me or not understanding, or maybe underestimating how intense my migraines and how dizzy I would be and how much that would actually affect me. I remember even my mom, sometimes I would tell her that I'm too dizzy to go to school, and you know, she'd be like, well, you have to try, or like, you're not that dizzy, like you can't be that dizzy not to be able to go to school, like maybe it's your anxiety holding you back, not your dizziness. But when the two are the same, essentially, then it's like I began to not know what my limits were. So I would go to school and get a migraine and kind of be helpless and have a group of people not know what to do with me, or I would stay at home where I could have gone to school just because I just didn't know what my limit was. And I don't think it's fair to assume that I have one. I think that following my intuition was always the best idea, but as I got older I began to question whether or not it was. So for about maybe a month and a half, or maybe just a month, a little bit over a month, I have been taking new medication by my cardiologist, who I started seeing for my dysautonomia. He prescribed to me fluticcortisone, I hope I pronounced that right, and propranolol, which I hope I also pronounced right, and those drugs have helped me immensely. Fluticcortisone is sort of like a steroid, corticosteroid, as Google says it. It just sort of treats POTS. It sort of balances out all the imbalances that comes with POTS. That helps with keeping all the water and salt in, so I don't just waste it. I think it helps regulate just sort of the automatic parts of my body that don't take care of themselves very well. And then propranolol is a beta blocker, and it regulates my heart. It helps with my blood pressure, and I think it helps with my exercising, because exercising has been so much easier as of late because of it, and it can also theoretically prevent or lessen the effect of migraine headaches. I'm taking very small dosage, I think the beginner's dosage for that, and it hasn't been long enough to tell if it can prevent my migraines. I am sort of reaching that territory to where about now I might start to get the early signs of dizziness and stuff like that, and I kind of was feeling bad yesterday, but today I feel fine. So absolute best case scenario is that the propranolol sort of lessens the effect of the migraine, or maybe I just don't get a migraine and I just get sort of dizzy and disoriented for a few days and that's it. I will say in my last cycle, like a migraine cycle, I started taking the medicine like right as I was about to have a migraine. I noticed that I never actually got that migraine, and sometimes very rarely that happens. Like, you know, sometimes occasionally I'll get lucky and it doesn't happen. Like, I'll just get really dizzy and bedridden for like a week or so, and then I just won't get the actual migraine, and it'll just kind of be like, well, that sucked, but like I wouldn't actually get the migraine. And so I figured it was just one of those rare occasions. But now that I'm thinking about it, maybe the medicine at the last second sort of like saved me from getting a migraine, but of course I don't know yet. I will post like videos talking about it, whether I got the migraine or not, or if I felt any differences, or if it was less severe. Here's hoping that it's less severe, because no matter how many times you go through it, it still sucks just as much every time. I do kind of want to go back to the list of symptoms that I showed in my introductory video, just to kind of talk about what those symptoms are like for me. I haven't had all the symptoms consistently, like I have kind of waxed and waned out of some of them as I grew up. So like I said in my last video, I experienced pretty much all of these symptoms, usually all of these symptoms while I'm having the actual migraine. Some of these when I'm not actually having the migraines, but I'm having those days leading up to it. So of course the dizziness, the spatial disorientation and detachment, the difficulty walking and standing. So for me, when I have my migraine, imagine like that feeling that you get when you spin around in circles for a whole lot and then like you stop suddenly and like everything in your vestibular system is still kind of going and like you can feel the room kind of move around you. Imagine that amplified times like 20, and like imagine that you are strapped to like some sort of twirly ride or whatever, like a very unfun merry-go-round or something like that, or not even that, just like imagine you are like, I don't know, strapped to a wheel or something, and you are just going and going and going and going, and you can feel yourself just like rocketing through space, just spinning and spinning and spinning. That's kind of what it's like for me, and it's to the point where I cannot open my eyes or anything like that. I have to be laying down, and the internal vertigo is still there, so it still feels like I'm being rocketed through space, spinning and spinning and spinning for hours, until it's over. And the vertigo is spontaneous. I mean, I will be very dizzy and I can feel it coming on, but the actual, like, when the migraine happens, it's just like, snap, there it is, it's here, and I have to lay down. Positional vertigo, like I said, I can't move when I'm having my vestibular migraine, partially because I can't, and partially because I really, really don't want to, because if I do, it will just get worse. It will get very, very bad, very, very fast. If I move at all, I cannot like turn and lay on my side or something like that. I know I've seen a lot of people, I've seen footage, people who are having migraines, they tend to lay on their side, and I can't imagine, because if I were to lay on my side, just like that action alone, like even sometimes, even moving my fingers sometimes, it just causes an intense amount of pain and vertigo. Visually induced vertigo, I get very car sick when I'm getting dizzy up to the days of my migraine. I can't look out the windows and I get very anxious. I do not like being in the car when I'm dizzy. It's not a fun experience. Sometimes it will trigger my migraine or make it happen faster. I don't know if there's any kind of like, I don't think I've ever like 100% triggered a migraine before, but I've made the migraine come faster than it normally would have. Can't watch TV or anything like that. Cannot scroll on a phone. Towards like when I'm getting close, I can't scroll down my phone. I have to basically just sit there and twiddle my thumbs and wait for the inevitable to come. Rapid involuntary movements of the eye. People who have looked down on my writhing, suffering body have noticed that my eyes do move around a lot, even when I'm like conscious and stuff like that, as if I'm dreaming. After a while, sort of fading in and out of consciousness while I'm in my bed, I will forget where I am completely. I mean, I'll be aware that I'm in my bed, like I can feel my bed, but like if you told me what position I was in or like where my limbs were or anything like that, I couldn't tell you. Sometimes I'll like flick open my eyes like just for a second just to check where I am, and I'm sort of like corkscrewed and stuff, and I'm like, how did I end up in this position? I had no idea I was in this position. Kind of sort of like when you fall asleep and you wake up in a weird position, except that like no matter how awake you are, you can't tell where you are. Head pressure, I think I get it behind my ears. I think that's where the pressure is. In the back of my head, I think is where it's worse, and also my forehead. I don't think I get a lot of sinus pressure. It's hard to remember. When I was little, I remember my head always kind of had a perma-tilt, no matter how I was feeling, whether I was out of my migraine or not. And I remember my mom brushing my hair. She had to straighten up my head so that she could brush my hair. My head was always kind of tilting, and I kind of grew out of that. There have been a couple of times where half of my face has drooped, my left side. It was only during the migraine. Once I got out of the migraine, I was fine. I'm not 100% sure what a unilateral pulsating sensation is, but I can't imagine it would be pleasant. I may have had it. I'm just not familiar with the term. Sensory exaggeration, of course. Sound is worse than light. Sound, I can't do sound at all. When I have a migraine, everyone stops what they're doing, everything goes dark, and they just have to wait for my migraine to be over. I know that sometimes when I hear people like coming home and I hear the door slam, I can't do it. Recently, as in the past couple years, I've started to wear earplugs. I don't know why I didn't think of it before, but I started wearing earplugs. It's a lifesaver. I'm not even kidding. At this point, I don't know what I would do without my earplugs. I think for a while when I was a kid, I would just kind of like try and power through it, but I think like as I got older, I was like, it just got worse. Sound for me just got worse and worse and worse, and I had to get earbuds, or else I don't know. What do you do in that situation where you can't do anything but you're in so much pain you feel like you're gonna explode? Tinnitus. There's something I did not mention in my earlier video. There are times, and it has nothing to do with my cycle of my migraines or anything like that, but one of my ears will just like suddenly lose a lot of hearing, and it'll ring very loudly, sort of a low pitch. It's not painful, it's just kind of surprising when it happens, and it lasts for about 30 seconds, and then I'm okay again. I'm not 100% familiar with Meniere's disease. I don't know what qualifies for Meniere's disease. In general, my hearing is fine. I haven't experienced like any less, been hearing things the same my whole life, but recently that has become an issue that I should probably talk to my doctors about. Auras, they're, for a lot of people they're visual or, audible, but, I do believe smelling and tasting things that aren't there before your migraine also counts as an aura. I tend to taste things like very bitter and metallic in the back of my tongue, and I smell things like skunks and stuff before I get my migraine, you know, and in places where you wouldn't smell skunks, like in the house. Obviously there's no skunks in the house, so I would kind of figure like maybe I'm close to a migraine or something like that. And of course, nausea, vomiting, all the time. It's great. I would recommend it to my friends and my family. I will make future videos kind of updating how my whole situation is going, how the medicine is helping me, the new doctors I see, you know, finding treatment for vestibular migraines and stuff like that. I will also, like, when I find out more information about Meniere's disease or like find out more information about vestibular migraines, I'll kind of just sort of make like an info video on that, just kind of like telling people what I know, and maybe I can like help people who have no idea about any of this in just sort of like my personal log of me learning about this. I'm pretty shy. I mean, I'm kind of hesitant about interacting with the very small community of vestibular migraine people. Not because like I don't like people, it's just because like I'm shy, but it would be cool to like reach out to people with vestibular migraines and talk to them. You know, have someone that could relate to what I'm going through, and I could relate to what they're going through. I've never really had that before, so I think experiencing that and talking to people would be pretty awesome. Actually, one more thing about dysautonomia and migraines. A lot of people with dysautonomia will get vertigo migraines, but it has a different name. People with dysautonomia will tend to get basilar or basilar migraines, which I looked into for a while because I thought that might have been what I was going through, but the symptoms didn't 100% match up. They didn't really make sense for what I was going through, but they do cause dizziness and double vision, lack of coordination, those kinds of things. They happen in the brainstem, so if you feel like vestibular migraines may not be what you're going through, but you might be going through something simpler, I would look into basilar or basilar migraines. They seem to be more brain related, artery and stuff like that. Well, vestibular has everything to do with your vestibular system and stuff like that. So, yeah.